So the Olympic City is a documentary photography project that John and I have been working on for the past 8 years. We've been interested in kind of exploring how cities transform themselves for the Olympics, and then also what happens in the decades that pass, and what life is like in these spaces now. So it's not a scientific research project. It's been very much a kind of a personal photography project for both of us. Just traveling to these places and staying for a few weeks and trying to kind of experience them through our photographs and try to get a sense of what these places are like. John?
So I don't know how many of you remember in 2008, for the 2008 Olympics, all the media coverage. It was pretty much about two things: Michael Phelps and the massive amount of money and infrastructure that was being built for this Olympics. So I was just sort of fascinated. I'm not really a fan of swimming, so I became fascinated though with all the infrastructure that was being built and what happens after these Olympics leave. And as a photographer, I tend to be interested in urban landscapes and how these urban landscapes evolve and how that evolution affects the people that live there. So in 2008, I started traveling around to see what remains in these Olympic cities. Yeah.
Lake Placid.
So the first one I went to was Lake Placid, and this city is completely run by the local Olympic committee there, and all the people are really pro-Olympics. A little village of 4,500 people. But they didn't have the money to bring the Olympics. So they asked the federal government. Federal government said, we don't really give money for that. So they said, what if we build a federal prison to house the athletes? So that's what they did. They got like $40 million from the government, and they built this prison. There was already a prison there, but they built another prison in this sort of bucolic area outside of Lake Placid. And the prisoners in the first prison helped build a lot of the Olympic infrastructure. They built the slopes. And this prison, they moved the inmates out, and then they moved the athletes in. Many countries chose not to do it. They bought little villas or something, but the Americans were here. And then, so then after the Olympics, they moved prisoners back in, and now it's a prison again. So there's two prisons there.
Mexico City was the first city that I went to. A little bit like about the process. We don't go to cities together. We'll each go to them, individually. But sometimes I'll be in one city when John is in some other city, and we kind of end up having this sort of conversation with the images, like, oh, what did you find? Oh, I found this, and check this out. And so it's interesting to be like halfway around the world and kind of collaborating on something in real time. So. Mexico City was the first place that I went to. An interesting thing about Mexico City was that it was the first Olympics that they had kind of a cultural component to it. And they invited artists from around the world to create this huge series of public artworks all around the city. And when I was researching it, what I found was one of the only kind of things that documented it was a film of Raquel Welch dancing in front of these monuments. So enjoy. Audio. From back there doing this live. We can do the dance. goes on for like 20 minutes. But the interesting kind of takeaway here is that when they built this stuff in Mexico City, it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was south of the city where there was no real development yet. And since '68, Mexico City has tripled in size from 7 million to over 21 million. So when I went trying to find this stuff, this is what I found. It's right there, see? The city is completely overwhelmed, these things. So trying to find this stuff, I think most people walk by this statue and have no idea that it's part of the Olympics or why it's there, but it's just been there for 50 years and they pass it by. So it's been interesting to see how, again, this stuff sort of meshes with the city or how it gets transformed depending on the growth of the city. There it is again. Los Angeles was another city that I did. I'm from Southern California. I went to the '84 Olympics. So for me, this was kind of a cool thing to try to go and explore and see like what was left. And there's not a lot left from the '84 games. They didn't really build a lot of new infrastructure, which was one of the reasons it was a success. The city made like $200 or $300 million from the games. And the LA Olympics kind of kickstarted this whole kind of hyper-competitive bidding thing for the Olympics that we see now. But one of the cool things, and probably the weirdest afterlife of an Olympic venue, is the Olympic Auditorium, which was built for the 1932 games. After the games, they turned it into it was like a boxing arena. They held like professional wrestling and roller derby events there throughout the 40s and 50s. The fight scenes for Rocky were filmed there in the 70s. It turned into a kind of a notorious hardcore punk venue, which I went to shows at the Olympic Auditorium, and I had no idea that it was an Olympic auditorium. I just thought that was what they called it. But now it's a Korean megachurch. So it's still there, and every weekend they have services for thousands of people in this massive old Olympic arena. So that was another interesting case of transformation and reuse. John?
Yeah, and Sarajevo was a city I first thought of when I thought of this project. It just has an interesting before and after, and then another before and after the war. And what we're looking at here is a bobsleigh track that was used as by the guerrillas to sort of look through and
like a sniper
holes. Yeah. So most of the venues were sort of destroyed or messed up during the war, the Bosnian War. This is the Igman ski slopes, but they're all being used, but not in the way they were originally intended. There's campers here from I think. I'm not sure what it was.
Youth group?
Some kind of youth group. They had something I called games of, what do they call it? Games of...
Without Borders?
Games Without Borders. So this is a crew of sort of young adults who were playing this game, where you have the egg and one of them might be hard-boiled and one might not. I guess you lose if it's not hard-boiled. They both lost in that case. And here's someone praying in front of the Igman slopes. They had to put up that big barrier because crazy people were flying down on skateboards and whatever.
And this was actually your guy.
Yeah, this was a friend who helped me and helped us. We did a Kickstarter for this project to help fund the travel, and this guy was one of the Kickstarter supporters in Sarajevo, a local guy, and he became a good friend. He showed me around. It was a time of his life, and we had a great time.
One thing, with this project that it's a long-term project. It's not, I think sometimes you get into a creative project and you're thinking, I've got to do this now, I've got to get this over with. And for us, it's been much more relaxed. Like, we're not in a hurry to get these places. We know they're still going to be there. We know the Olympics will probably still exist in our lifetimes. So it's been kind of, I think, great to not have that, I guess, the pressure to do it, because these places are going to be there when we get around to getting to Sydney or Melbourne or Tokyo.
And part of what's interesting is the different amount of times that the time that has lapsed. So we went to one from Helsinki, was 1952, and it's interesting to see what's happened.
Yeah, or going to London from the 2012 games, or Barcelona.
So Barcelona is sort of held up as one of the most positive Olympics. They did about 50 years of they use it sort of as an excuse to do 50 years of infrastructure improvements in 5 years or so. So this beach was before was not open to the city. It was really
it's like an
industrial port. Fishermen lived there. And this is sort of the famous high dive that's still being used. And to the right, there's another pool that's used by the community. It's open to the community.
Yeah. Barcelona is a case of they weren't just hosting the Olympics to have a 2-week party and spend $50 billion. And, they actually used the money. They've been trying to do a lot of these improvements for decades, and they actually used that money for the Olympics to put in place changes that the city actually needed versus changes, versus transforming the city just for this event when there was no organic demand for this stuff. Which brings us to Athens.
Athens is sort of the opposite case, where they lost the previous bid, and they wanted to get this bid at all costs. And they didn't really have a plan for what to do with any of the venues afterwards. They thought they would, rent them out to malls and things. But they so 21 of the 22 venues are really unused and sort of, and they're hard to get into. The country's really trying to protect these sites from being photographed at this point, because it. And this is a guy that's one of the top 5 collectors of Olympic pins in the world. And this is just, he said, this is not anything. You need to come to my island to see the rest. Everyone has an island they go to in Greece.
But yeah, again, like Athens is an example of, there wasn't a plan afterwards. They spent billions. It didn't kind of cause the economic collapse that they, subsequently had as a nation, but it didn't help, I think, to spend billions on these places that are just, And
again, that was my, the guy helping me out there. That was his father, Teo. He just happened to be, everyone had a story there about how Teo worked for the Olympics when he was there. His father worked for the telecommunication company that helped sponsor the Olympics.
London, one of the more recent cities, definitely learned some of the lessons from past Olympics. A lot of the infrastructure was built with the intent to either dismantle it afterwards, or they were pop-up venues that were totally temporary. These guys are narrowboat owners. They have these little boats that go around the canal. Actually, I can go back one slide, and you can see this narrowboat.
That's the same guys.
Same guys. People would just dock in this area and live on these narrowboats. When the Olympics came through, they were forced to leave because they were renting out these slips to yacht owners or something like that. But many of them have returned since then. But interesting to see kind of how these developments kind of affect people that are living there. So this was the beach volleyball in Horse Guards Palace when it was actually happening, but this is a totally temporary venue. This is it now. So that idea that it doesn't have to be permanent, infrastructure to host, a 2-week event. You don't have to spend billions. But they did spend billions in other ways. But some of these places are still. This is the swim stadium that Zaha Hadid designed. That right now you can see that they were taking the grandstands out and replacing that with windows. And now it's opened as a community swim center.
It's quite beautiful.
Yeah. This is the book of the project. We did the first 13 cities. We did a book of the photographs. And we're continuing to do more cities. I was just in Seoul last week shooting South Korea and shooting the facilities from the '88 games. And again, it's a long-term project, so we're going to kind of continue on. If you want to follow us along for the next 20, 30 years. There's a website. I wonder if we'll even have websites in 20 or 30 years. But,
no, it'll just be in our brain.
Yeah. But for now, if you want to follow along or get involved, you have ideas, or if you're from an Olympic city and want to talk more about it, you can get a hold of us there. So, yeah. Thanks a lot, everyone.